So you've got those things, the political simplicity, because once the first emperor had simplified it, it got rid of feudalism, which is quite a complicated system of sub-power, and he'd simplified it into the most simple structure, which is just basically the top, and then a bit of power down and down and down and down, everything coming up to the top. Now that's the
when did that happen then? When was that?
221 BC.
Right.
The unification of China. So you've got the simplest of all political ideologies like that. You've got all these others, and then you've got a simplification of in Confucianism, which basically makes everything hierarchical. So everything is, you know exactly where your place is. You know, men are above women, older people above younger people, so on and so on. So every relationship is exactly ordered and orderly in a very simple hierarchical structure. So it's social structure, ideological structure, economic structure, or mechanisms are all the simplest they could be, and they've been preserved like the ginkgo tree. So that's really what I wanted to say.
How does it, because I'm interested in this, one of the things where you get no social, and you've talked about this, where you get social mobility through education, but once you've got where you're going to be in the hierarchy, you kind of sit there, don't you? How does that not how does the system deal with the kind of resentment that might be fostered by this, if you feel that, you know, you can't get anywhere except through these exams, and you're not going to get anywhere because you've done the exam and you've not done very well, and now you're stuck? Why is there not more rebellion or kickback against that kind of system in China? Because you can imagine that in say in England or America, you know, you do get kickback, you get frustration. You know, the class system is where it's gets ground to a halt. You tend to get, you know, the working class say, we don't like this anymore, we kick back. How does that get dealt with in China?
Well, I think there are, I mean, immediately several things spring to mind. One is that you believe in it. In other words, you are so deeply grounded into it that you subscribe to it and you don't challenge it. In other words, it's a game which you enter voluntarily. You try to move up it. And if you are not successful, you don't blame the system, you blame yourself. And therefore, those who end up at a certain level think that they aren't as clever as the people above them, and they deserve. I mean, again, under the Manchus particularly, the whole system became corrupt and there was a lot of cheating, and if you were rich, you could buy your way up the system and so on and so on. But for much of the time, people actually accepted it. And that, I mean, if you think back to our youth, or certainly my youth, that was a view that was quite widely held once about academic promotion in Britain. I mean, the toffs up there, they may be annoying, but they, you know, they got there through going to Oxford and Cambridge. And, you know, these guys are brighter than us. I mean, there's an acceptance of the way that system works. So firstly, it's ideological acceptance. And another feature is that there are alternatives. That is to say, in the Chinese system, if you got right up to the top, then you were a full-time administrator and Mandarin and so on and so on. But if you sort of, at each level, if you got to that level but no further, you then went off sideways into various occupations and levels. You might become a lower level administrator, or a school teacher, or whatever. And then you could do lots else. And because the Chinese, then they don't have quite the obsession of Americans with money and wealth buying you status, but they really do, as Huck so brilliantly again and again shows, they are obsessed with money and making profits. And also esteem those who've been successful at that. I mean, you can see it in China now, you know, Jackie Ma and Alibaba type folks who make millions, and even people who are driving around in big cars in Beijing, like a number of our friends, they get a lot of esteem. Now, people say, well, you know, they must be bright and they've done some deals maybe, but, you know, so in China, there was constant attempts. I mean, I've seen it even with my friend Zilan. You know, she can't go into a shop without a sort of urge to try and bargain.
Yeah.
And when she has her own shop, you know, she's delighted if in some way she can pull off some kind of bargain.
Yeah.
So they are like the best of Arab traders or
I was going to say this
Indian businessmen. You know, the sport and joy of outwitting, outmaneuvering, and making a little profit, tiny profits, give you the greatest pleasures in life. So the Chinese, any middle-ranking Chinese who felt frustrated that they'd only become a minor administrator or whatever, also could then set about doing all this other stuff and having a pretty interesting life. Because that's the other thing, they haven't separated off, their job doesn't give them all their status nor all their satisfactions. So they might not have got very far up. But what about the pleasures of eating? You know, if you can make money from these little transactions and so on, you can have good meals. And anyone who's, I don't know if you've seen the film Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, or whatever it's called. Film. I mean, basically that's China. Eat, drink, man, woman. If you want to single out one thing in China that is important, it's food and eating. So, you know, you don't have to be very rich, and you have a really interesting gastronomic life. And what about family? I mean, since much of your pleasure and happiness is derived from social relations, and particularly of your family, even if you haven't made it to the top, if you've got a good family and children and people around you who you like to be with and friends and so on. So basically you can be very satisfied without moving up. I mean, this is one of the hidden injuries of our system, the dissatisfaction. However much you achieve, you want and need something more. So it's actually, it reminds me of that. One of the things that used to amuse my mother and I in places like Calcutta, you'd see on people's people who'd become doctors or semi-doctors or semi-lawyers, it said BA Calcutta brackets plunk. That meant failed.
All right.
So a failed BA at Calcutta University was just as good as a BA. So you can get on with life even if you.
Excellent. I like that. Oh, I can do that.